Hey, thank you so much for joining us at our Crosspoint Church podcast. Now, if you're new to our podcast or maybe new to our church in general, we're just a bunch of messed up people who don't have it all together, running after a heavenly leader who loves us and meets us right where we are. We hope this message encourages you, builds your faith, and strengthens your confidence as you continue down this journey of what it means to know and follow Jesus. Enjoy this message.
Let's thank the band for leading us. Man, I tell you what, great stuff. Hey, go ahead and grab a seat. I tell you what, if you showed up today, I think you're winning already. I really do. I think, I know my spirit's been encouraged by the time we've had together already. Welcome to Crosspoint. My name's Curt, and if you're here for the first time, so excited to have you with us as we're in week 3 of this series called Spark, Ideas That Ignite. And we got a whole bunch of people join us online. Let's make some noise, give some love to those in our online spaces across our city, state, nation, and world. So excited to have you with us today. And I'm really excited about this idea we're going to talk about this weekend. And we're going to look at a process that I believe really can change us. And it's one of recognizing and actually resisting the sabotage that comes at us to try to get us to live out of things that are unauthentic, that are not real, and in a sense, lies. And when this happens, it steals our freedom, it steals our joy, it steals our contentment. And so we're going to kind of look at what it looks like to identify some of the places in our world, in our culture, and even in ourselves that we sometimes buy into lies, how to resist them, how to kind of change our mindset on this. And we know that when this happens, we actually make better decisions, we have fewer regrets, life is so much better. Now, one of the books I've been reading recently that kind of is informing this, I actually gave it to you guys a few weeks ago, and apparently you loved it because it flew off the shelf out at Connection Point. It's a book called Live No Lies, and it was recommended to me by a pastor I listened to by the name of Chuck Mingo, and he kind of hooked me. He said, hey, if there's one book you're going to read this summer, this has got to be the book. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get the book if this is the one book. And so it's been really transformational for me to just kind of wrestle through, okay, where are the places in my life where I live in an unreality, where I believe things that aren't necessarily something that I should be putting my faith into. And one of the things we realize is when we do that, we struggle with contentment, we struggle with peace, we struggle with happiness. Now, there's been a lot of things happening over the last week, a lot of things happening in our lives. We have to constantly be discerning, okay, what do I believe about this situation? What do I believe about myself? Even questions about, okay, what do I believe about God? Now, I want to kind of tell you a little story here. I'm going to try to keep it short to give you an illustration of just how this kind of plays out for us. About a week ago, our family was traveling home. We spent a couple weeks down south in the Carolinas and then Florida, and we were coming back home last weekend. And we do this pretty frequently. When we travel back from Florida, we usually travel through the night. So we've done this, 35, 40 times over the years, where we leave at like 6 o'clock in the evening, and my wife will drive a few hours, I'll pick up the overnight hours, and then, she'll pick back up, and we'll, the whole goal is to like get through Atlanta without any traffic at 2 in the morning, right? And so, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And so, we're doing this. We leave about 6:30. It's about 10:30. I'm sleeping, getting ready to drive around midnight, and my wife wakes me up. We just passed into Georgia, and she wakes me up and she says, hey, Curt, I know we're not at time yet for you to drive, but like an alert came on our dashboard that says battery, and it also says check charging system. She says, I don't think that's good. I'm like, you are exactly right. That is not good. And so, we, found an exit to pull off on, just a couple miles up the road. And the moment she began to pull off, all of a sudden, all the gauges just kind of went haywire on the dash and, flashed and all this stuff. She lost power in the van, and we pulled over into the exit lane. And as she pulled over and slowed down, everything just went back to normal. In fact, the battery light even went off. And so the power came back, and we drove off the exit and got off and went to a gas station and just sat there and said, okay, what should we do? Now, at that point, the car was driving fine. And the other thing that's kind of is significant in that moment, it's about 10:30 at night, 10:45. Nothing is open. There's no service station where we can go and have this checked out. So we're sitting there and we're like, what do we do? And, we could get a hotel. It's Friday night, 10:45. We'll probably be stuck here for the night, maybe the weekend. We could call our for a tow, or at least for a roadside assistance, have them check the battery. It might take a couple hours. And so we just sat there for a few moments, but everything seemed fine. The lights were all off. And so we kind of, processed and discerned, so what should we do? Should we wait? Should we go on? And we just decided, okay, let's keep going and see if this happens again. Maybe it was a one-time thing. So I jump in the driver's seat and we, continue down the highway, and about 15 minutes, we're totally good. And then all of a sudden the battery light comes on again. And this time, pretty quickly after it came on, the dash lights all kind of went haywire, and all of a sudden we lost power. And we just happened to be next to an exit, so I immediately veer over, and the car shuts down as I'm pulling over, and we start coasting up the ramp of this interchange. And, our lights are going dim. The only difference this time is there is nothing at this intersection. I mean, it's totally black, no street lights, no filling station, nothing. I mean, nothing visible at all. It's completely dark in the middle of nowhere in southern Georgia. And so we kind of coast to the top of the interchange and just sit there and put our hazard lights on. And as we're sitting there, I immediately call for roadside assistance for a tow, and our insurance company says, hey, we'll work on it, but this is a difficult area. There's not a lot of service, and it might be a few hours. So, by the way, it's also like 85 degrees still. So we open the doors, just to get a little air. And my wife says, I should probably check and see if this is a safe area. So she Googles, the area of Tifton, Georgia. How safe is it? And this is the news, article. Tifton named one of Georgia's most dangerous cities. And so you're like, hey, kids, you need to shut the doors. We're going to have to, tough this out inside while we wait on a tow truck. I kid you not, in about a minute and a half, there's a car that comes, first car we see, comes in front of our vehicle, turns its lights off as it gets in front of us, circles around and parks about 25 or 30 feet in front of us at the interchange. And all of a sudden we're like, all right, what's going on right here? And all we can see is like a mobile device, like the light of a device in the car, and our hearts are starting to beat a little fast. And we're like, okay, maybe this is why this is a dangerous area. Maybe there's people that just wait to ransack people when they get stuck on the side of the road. And so we're kind of like, okay, we're feeling a bit of tension in this moment. And so, we decide, hey, we need to call 911. So we call 911, we get dispatch on the phone, say, hey, we need a police officer to come out. We're stuck. It's dark. Here's our intersection. And I'm going to pause the story right there, and then I'm going to come back to it in a bit and tell you how that resolved. I know some of you are like, oh my gosh, we did this a few weeks ago. I promise you I'll come back and tell you the end of this. But I want to pause here for a moment because there's a lot going on in this moment right here, right? A lot going on. And for us in that moment, there's no peace. We're feeling no sense of contentment, no sense of happiness. We're trying to evaluate, okay, we're feeling some anxiety, fears. What indicators do we need to pay attention to? What thoughts that we're having about our safety in this moment, are appropriate? What thoughts are just the enemy playing with us? And so, and then we're feeling some guilt, like, oh my gosh, we never should have left the gas station 15 miles back down the highway. And so a lot of things going on in this moment. And Mark John Comer, in this book, Live No Lies, he says, the wonder of the human person is our ability to hold in our minds ideas that correspond to reality and ideas that don't correspond to reality. Meaning, we have the ability to say, okay, what should I believe about this current situation? What do I believe about myself right here? What do I believe about God in this moment? Do I believe God sees me? He knows what's going on with me. To put it another way, we have the ability to say, okay, what is and what isn't? Meaning, what is reality in this moment I'm in right now? What is the truth? And what isn't, or what is unreality, which are the lies. And this is what we get the chance to do as humans. See, this is actually what separates you and I from animals, from every other living creature. In fact, even if you trust the evolutionary explanation of human origins, which, that's a question I got for God someday. I want to know how the creation story and evolution all interface, because I believe there's some interface. But, one of the realities is a lot of research recently that came out in a book called Sapiens indicated some really fascinating things. They said the case that the reason Homo sapiens ended up as a dominant species wasn't our size or strength or even our opposite thumbs. It was our capacity for imagination. We're the only creatures who have the capacity to imagine what isn't, but also what could be. And so imagination, think about this, is one of our greatest gifts that God has instilled us with. All right, this is what enables the miracle of human society. Right? This is what allows us to envision things that currently aren't a reality and actually put effort toward them and make them a reality. All right, things like, developing communities or, a whole civilization. This is what enables, human creativity to continue forward. It's what allows us to build things, to, develop apps, to, do new riffs on guitars. Oh my gosh, I've never done this before. I think this would work. To all kinds of things. Write a novel. And yet, this capacity to hold on to something that currently doesn't exist and through our bodies bring it to reality, while that's an amazing gift, it's pretty incredible, by the way. At the same time, there's a negative side to this unreality. And the negative side, or the problem side with this, is that while our ability to hold on to reality in our own minds is our genius, it also creates an Achilles heel. And what's fascinating about this, one of those moments where our strength actually creates something that can be a weakness. Because not only can we imagine something that currently isn't there, but we can also come to believe things that are unreal. Meaning it opens us up to put our faith into ideas that are untrue, or even worse, that are lies. And so we have to say, okay, how do we discern those things? For instance, it's the grown man who was berated by his father growing up to believe that I'm only as good as I am successful in my work. It's the teenage girl who, while comparing herself on a mirage of Instagram posts, comes to the belief that I'm ugly and I'm unworthy of love. It's the wife whose husband's cheating on her, but she's been told, hey, the spark's gone, we're 12 years into marriage, you've had 3 kids, and she begins to believe, hey, I'm not really, worth being loyal to, and so I guess that's what guys do. I don't deserve to be loyal to. It's an entrepreneur whose prior business failed because of the betrayal of a partner, but he goes on to begin to believe that everything I do is going to end in a failure. It's the middle-aged woman who was raised by an angry perfectionist mother who decades later still believes that you have to be perfect to have peace. Now, those examples right there, I've changed a few of the details just for anonymity, but those are not hypothetical situations. Those are some of the hundreds of stories I've heard over the years that people have shared with me or entrusted with me as a pastor. And one of the things I've discovered is that I don't know that there's a single one of us that in some way, shape, or form aren't living in some kind of bondage to things that are unreality or that are lies. And so I want to look at 3 sources of the things that bring these lies into our lives and the ways we have this temptation to actually begin to believe them. And before we do this, I want to show you another story. I want to show you a video story. I want you to hear somebody's story. And I'm going to warn you, this story's a bit intense, all right? But it's actually the raw nature of it and kind of the blatant nature of this story that I think helps maybe best demonstrate how these lies are how we kind of take these in and we begin to live out of them, but it also shows how there's a freedom and a happiness that comes when we actually resist and move past these. And so I want you to take a look at Brian Welch's story on the screens here.
So in my head, I was like, okay, I'm going to accept Christ in front of everybody right now. Then I'm going to go home and snort drugs until I don't want to do them anymore. And that was my way of thinking. So I received Christ. At the church, I went home, neglected my daughter and put her in front of the TV. I remember I grabbed a $100 bill. I always used a $100 bill for some reason, pride or something. I chopped up my crystal meth, got it all smooth and powdery, and I snorted a big old line. And I held the bill and I looked up and I said, Jesus, if you're real like that pastor said, then you got to take these drugs from me. Come into my life, come into my heart. And I just got quiet. I said, search me right now, search my heart. And I stayed silent. And I said, I want to quit. I want to be a good dad for this kid. She lost her mother to drugs, and she's going to lose me if I don't quit. Amen. There's a high when you go on stage and you see all these people like just loving your music and loving you and stuff, and there's these girls and all these people going worshiping me. When you see all those people just going nuts for you, it's like, it puffs you up inside. You're like, I'm important. That's where drugs can creep in, and cocaine or whatever, methamphetamines crept in, and it all came from after drinking for me and my friends, and it seems like fun in the beginning. It's a lie because it turns around on you. It starts to wear on your personality, starts to wear on your relationships, and everything is affected by it negatively. Everything. There was a few times where life seemed good. My daughter, Janaea, she came into the world, and I was like, it was just such a euphoric feeling. I thought, my life could just feel like that forever, you know? It was spiritual, just, I didn't know what was happening. I just felt so much love just fill my emotions. And I thought I was gonna be happy, but I just I couldn't stay sober. I didn't know how. I hit rock bottom. I had swore that I would never do methamphetamines again because I saw what it did to my child's mother. It just took her feelings away and made her leave her kid. I just wanted her dead. I wanted to kill her. I thought she was a scum of the earth. And you know, how could she do drugs like that and let the drugs win her like that? So I never was gonna do meth again. I ended up with a everyday crippling addiction to methamphetamine, and everything that I said about my ex-wife came true for me. I sunk to the lowest gutter I could ever think of. I would spend time with my kid, and I would still be on it because I needed it to function. I'd get up in the morning, have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and snort meth, and then take her to school or whatever. It was just, I was a junkie. I started losing my mind. This guy would show up at my house with like a gun and stuff. And then I ran out in Europe, had my drug dealer just crazy send me drugs through the mail. I'd be tweaked out in my hotel room watching this package come from the U.S. It's just nuts. My life just was like spinning out of control. Janaea had come out on one of the tours in the U.S. I just remember her skipping around the house. She's singing one of our Korn songs called Adidas. All day I dream about sex. And I'm like going, what am I doing? I'm a junkie. My daughter's singing All Day I Dream About Sex. And I'm gonna die. Father? My real estate broker, Eric, he said, Brian, I don't mean to be weird with you, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I felt the scripture like jump out at me. I've never done this before, you know, so I don't really know how to do this, but I felt like this would mean something to you. It's Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I remember all tweaked out. I looked up in the dictionary, weary. I looked up burdened, and I pulled the scripture apart, and I was like, oh, I'm weary and burdened, and I need rest for my soul. And I didn't know if it was real, but you know, they invited me to church a couple weeks later, and I received Christ at the church. I went home, neglected my daughter, got it all smooth and powdery. Jesus, you got to take these drugs from me. Search me right now. Search my heart. Father, I felt so much fatherly love from heaven, and it was like, I don't condemn you. I love you. I love you. It was just love, and instantly that love from God came into me. It was so powerful that the next day I threw away all my drugs, and I quit corn. I was like, I'm quitting corn, and I'm gonna raise my kid, because my kid, like, I got the love from God coming to me, and then it came out of me to my kid. It changed me. My heart was changed like that, and I was like, Janaea, Daddy's gonna be home with you all the time. I'm quitting my career. And her face lit up, and she's like, for me? You know, she felt so special, and God used her to save me, to save her life later on. My dream came true way more than I dreamt about. I made more money. I played bigger shows. I mean, houses, cars. I tried drugs, I tried sex, I tried everything to try to get pleasure out of this life. And I thought that I could fulfill my life with all this stuff by having my dream come true, and it came true, but it didn't fulfill it. When Christ came in, that feeling, he gives you the gift of understanding life, which is everything was created for Christ and by him. And we're created to be with him. And it's the most incredible feeling because you're where you belong. And contentment is given to you in life because you don't have to look anywhere else. And you're exactly where you need to be. And the question about life is answered. I'm Brian Head Welch, and I am second.
Wow, that's pretty intense. I love, what he said right there about a lie. He said it's a lie because it begins to wear on your personality, it begins to wear on your relationships, and everything is affected by it negatively, everything. We probably have things in our life, we're like, man, I've been there, I felt that. Maybe not in the intensity he has, but things that are like, man, this just doesn't seem like it's doing what I thought it was going to do. What I want us to see today is unreality or lies actually distort our souls, and they drive us to ruin. And I don't have to tell you that because we actually feel it, we actually experience it. In fact, again, the author of this book, Live No Lies, he puts it a different way. He says, we sin, meaning we miss the mark when we believe a lie about what we think will make us happy. And so I want to unpack 3 sources for us today and really give us some tools on how to identify the lies in our lives. How do we identify some of the things that we might be operating out of, the things we might be believing in, and how they perhaps are sabotaging not only our peace, but our happiness in our lives, and how we can recognize these sources. So we're going to look at a letter that a guy in the New Testament by the name of the Apostle Paul wrote. And if you're not familiar with Paul, Paul's a guy who writes more than half of the New Testament part of the Bible. And sometimes, especially if you're newer to like church or faith, or you're just checking this out, it's kind of like, gosh, these people that write these scriptures, they obviously are pretty steep. They're like biblical giants. And so they know what they're talking about. That's not where my life is. Paul is not that kind of guy. In fact, Paul actually didn't grow up in a home that talked about Jesus. Paul was very religious, but not in around things of Jesus. It was a very do the right thing. Everybody hit their mark. High reward, high penalty if you don't do the right thing. So he didn't know anything about grace. In fact, he was actually against the movement of Jesus. And then one day he just had this radical experience, kind of like what Brian Welch talked about, where it's like all of a sudden he just experienced the love of God and he changed his mind about who this person of Jesus is. And so now we find him writing these letters to people who are trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like to follow and experience Jesus? What does it look like to experience the happiness and the contentment and the peace that Jesus brings? And so this is where we find Paul writing this letter, and he kind of gives us this trifecta, if you will, of the sources that try to sabotage our lives. And so here's what he says right here in this letter to these Christians in Ephesus. He says, as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world, and the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit, he's referring to the devil right there, by the way, and the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. And so he's kind of like, hey, we have all been there. Some of us are there right now. Some of us, we need to think back. We were all there at some point. And then he goes on, he says, all of us also lived among them at one time, meaning all of us have been a part of this. None of us are void of this, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Now, Paul gives us the trifecta of enemies of the soul right here. And so I want to just break these out for us real quick and kind of pull them out of this passage. The first one he talks about, he says the world is one of those sources. He says, you followed the ways of the world, meaning there are certain ways in the world, certain systems in the world, that when we live out of those things, we live in a reality that doesn't lead to happiness, doesn't lead to contentment and peace. The second thing he says right here is flesh. He says, gratifying the cravings of our flesh. This is our desires. He says, we all have desires. We all have these desires that seem right at the moment, but they actually don't lead us to more contentment and more happiness. And then the third one he talks about here is the devil. He says, it's the ruler of the kingdom of the air. Meaning there is a spiritual entity, there is a spiritual being that is constantly coming at you, constantly coming at me. And so early apprentices of Jesus, they actually would have kind of seen this framework, and they called this the 3 enemies of the soul. And so they said, they recognized, they said part of the battle is just recognizing, okay, what are the things that are bringing these unrealities into my life? Now, I want to unpack these a bit more for us. So the first one Jesus says are the lies that come from the world around us. Basically saying, hey, all around you, there are systems in this world that you and I know. There's financial systems. Listen, we have the greatest financial system in the world, in my opinion. And yet he says, if you're looking for that financial system to bring happiness and contentment to your soul, you're going to be longing. You're going to find that is not going to take you there. there. We have political systems. We have, certain ways that our world works. We even have systems for, putting, certain stimulants in our body. And again, Brian Welch just talked about that. He said there are certain things that the world says, when you do this, it's going to create certain levels of happiness, but what we end up finding is that they're all lies. And then he talks about the second source of lies. He talks about how we all have these desires or these lies of the flesh. In essence, what he's saying is we all want to do things that we know aren't good for us, but we do it anyway. In fact, Woody Allen, he didn't coin this term, but he kind of made it famous. He said back a number of years ago, a heart wants what a heart wants. And he did that when he had an affair with his then wife's daughter, who was his stepdaughter, who he eventually ended up marrying as a teenager. And so, but he just kind of blew it off. He's like, well, a heart wants what a heart wants. And then Selena Gomez came along and created a song by the same name. And so, we just have this tendency to do what our heart wants to do. And the Apostle Paul reminds us, says, hey, all of us do this. He says, all of us used to live this way, following the passionate desires and the inclinations of our sinful nature. Some of us, we struggle with this on a daily basis. But he says, remember, all of us have been here. And then he says the third realm that we have these sources that try to get us to live less than the fullness of life is from this entity known as Satan or the devil. And for some of us, this is where it gets a little weird because you're like, are you really saying there is a real Satan? There is a real devil? I like to think of it as an intelligent darkness. That's how I think of this evil entity. But what Jesus is saying is, yes, there is an evil entity in the world. Now, it's important to note that Jesus, for him, the devil's not some fictitious, villain like we see in Harry Potter. All right, he's not like some, just figure that's out there. He's like, no, this is a real personality, a real entity that is actually coming at you and at me to take us out. In fact, Jesus, here's how we put it one time. He said, there is a thief. This is the description he gives to this entity right here. There is a thief who comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. He says he's out there. He's going to try to steal. He's going to try to kill. He's going to try to destroy your happiness, to destroy your contentment. But Jesus says, hey, but don't lose heart because there's something that actually has more power than that entity. Jesus says, I have come that they may have life. They, meaning you, me, and have life to the full. And so the question is, what do we do about this? What do we do about these sources? How do we resist? How do we identify and recognize these sources? Well, the first thing we have to do is recognize that oftentimes there are breakdowns as we work through trying to resist these things. And in my experience, one of the things we struggle with in our Western American culture, and I'm a part of that, I struggle with this at times, is what I call kind of this is my list right here, the 5 misguided filters that most Western Americans, operate out of. And that is that we always use the first filter of, my safety, the second filter of my comfort, the third comfort, my security, the fourth comfort of, my financial well-being. I mean, how is this going to affect me financially? And then the fifth one being the common road. Is this a common thing? Is this what everyone is doing? And I've just found that when I look at the life of Jesus, these aren't necessarily the filters that Jesus uses at all to help us understand, the way that we find ourselves at a place where we really have true contentment and happiness. But this tends to be the metrics that we use here in our modern day culture. In fact, a few years ago, I had somebody question me about some of the stories I tell from the platform up here. They said, hey, how many of those stories are actually real? Like how much of it do you fabricate or just kind of embellish to make a good story? And I'm like, gosh, I've never been asked that question, but none. They're all real. I just tell them to you, as they kind of happen. And they're like, I don't know. And here was the $1 million question. They're just like, well, why doesn't God give me experiences like that? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know why you don't have experiences like that. I really don't. And as I was sitting there kind of fumbling and thinking about it for a moment, though, I thought, well, if you're operating out of this list right here, my safety, my comfort, my security, my financial well-being, perhaps part of why we sometimes don't see the unique character of God show up in unique ways in our lives is because we never do anything that pushes us out of our zones of safety or comfort or security or financial well-being, and we always take the common road. And so it's not like God has to really do anything to show up and reveal himself because we never allow ourselves to be in places where we need that. And so I want to give you a tool today, and I'm going to tell you, this tool that comes out of this book by John Mark Comer, this is transformational. This is a powerful, powerful tool in helping us recognize and resist the lies and allow God to show up and take us to new places in our spiritual journeys, wherever we may be. Now, I'm going to warn you, because some of you, as soon as I say this, you're going to check out on it. You're like, I don't like doing this. It is a journaling process, all right? It's a journaling process, and this is something in the book, Live No Lies, and it's not specific to John Mark Comer. I've done something similar to this in many different cases across the course of my life. It's just that the way he lays it out, it's so clear and it's so articulate and it's so doable that I guarantee you, if you will put this into practice this week, this idea will actually change things. And here's what he calls it. He calls it monastic journaling. All right, it's a guide to recognizing and resisting the lies that come into our lives from these three sources. Now, the goal for this process is similar to what we see Jesus go through in Matthew chapter 4, right before he begins his public ministry. One of the things Jesus does before he begins going out and healing and teaching and doing all these things is he takes a 40-day stint into the wilderness where he fasts, and he uses that season to kind of prepare himself, to strengthen himself spiritually. And one of the things that happens is this evil entity comes at him and continues to kind of barrage him with lies about himself, about his identity, about his needs, about his purpose. And he has to regularly think through, okay, what is that lie, and what is the lie that I potentially am faced with right here? And then what does God say about this so I can reset my mindset? And so this monastic journaling experience is really something that helps us do that. And it basically allows us to change the channel when we find ourselves living out of something that may not be of God. It allows us to kind of, resist the redirection. And in fact, the ancients call this counter-talking. Like, how do I change my direction? How do I counter-encourage myself when I find myself going into paths that don't lead to happiness, contentment, and fulfillment? And so here's how it goes. There's three questions to this process, all right? And you can screenshot these, but I'm going to give them all to you here in a moment in a way to kind of download these. So the first question is this, is to write out an obsessive thought that you keep having or keeps coming to mind that you just can't seem to shake. Now, we all have these at times, right? Maybe it's a toxic feeling. Maybe it's a feeling of shame. It's a feeling of guilt. Maybe it's a sensation in your body. Maybe you have moments where there's a tightness in your chest. Maybe it's like the shallow breathing, kind of like when we were sitting at the top of that ramp and all of a sudden there's this car in front of us, like all of a sudden our hearts start racing. Maybe it's a sense of dread. And I want to note and mention right here that this is called a journaling process because writing these things down is critical. You almost have to write these things down to separate my sensations from my emotions, from my thoughts. It's almost like writing them down like chapters in a book. Because see, if we don't write them down in our bodies, these things just overlap and collide and they mix together and they create this chemical reaction. All right, this is why writing them down, this is why journaling on these things is so, so important. And listen, I'm late in the game to journal. And I just picked this up a couple of years ago because I was like, I don't journal, I don't write things down, I don't need to do that. I have discovered this is such a powerful tool right here. So let me give you an example of what this might look like right here. What's the thought or the feeling or the sensation? Well, I feel a tightness in my chest, which leads to shallow breathing, almost to hyperventilating. Why am I feeling this way? Well, I'm worried about losing my job and not being able to make my mortgage payment. All right, so just writing that down, starting to say, okay, what's the sensation? What's the feeling? What are the things that I'm experiencing right here? Now, after you get that down, in box 2, this is where you begin to see if you can articulate a lie that is behind the thought or the feeling in the first box. All right, meaning, if you're feeling a tightness in your chest, why is that? Maybe the lie is, well, I just don't feel safe when I get criticized. Or maybe the lie is, man, if I don't look like I have all my stuff together, if somebody sees me kind of struggling, man, I feel like they look at me as a lesser person, and all of a sudden we begin to have a bit of pride sit in, and we begin to have fast breathing. All right, so here's what an example of this question might look like. What's the lie beneath the thought, the feeling, or the sensation, and what does this reveal about the attachment? Well, my safety and my security are in my job, and looking like I've got it together, or owning new things, or having new things, these are the things that help me feel happy. These are the things that help me feel content. right? And then the third box, the next phase in this three-part process, is where you begin to identify and write out, okay, what's the scripture or what's the word that the Holy Spirit is actually giving me, or the promise that God gives us that counters this lie, right? Meaning, this is where you turn to God and say, okay, God, what do you say about what I'm feeling right now? All right, what's the reality? How do I tap into reality? Because how do I replace the unreality, the lie, with God's truth or the reality that allows me to begin to change my heart and my mindset and my behavior to be more in alignment with God's character? And I just want you to know, this is not like a once and done thing. You might have the same item come up over and over and over, and it's an ongoing process. Like, we have to continue to capture these lies. We have to put them down. We have to identify, okay, what's the thing behind this feeling? What's the lie that is feeding this? And what's the truth that I can actually apply to resist this? All right, so here's what the example in box 3 might look like. What's the truth? This is where you might go, okay, Hebrews chapter 13 says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So okay, what's God's promise, and how do I write that down so I can begin to change my mindset? Now, here is where we have another like breakdown moment for many of us right here, because some of us are like, I don't know if I'd be able to pull that scripture up right there, right? I don't know if I'd be able to say that's what Jesus, God's promise is right there. All right, so this is why you hear us talk ad nauseum around here about downloading the YouVersion Bible app. All right, and so I'm going to put the QR code up for this, and the YouVersion Bible app. I just think everybody on their phone should have a Bible app, so you've got the Bible at your fingertips, so you can refer to it, reference it when you need it. Now, if you have a different Bible app, totally cool. But if you don't have the YouVersion Bible app or a Bible app, then I think your next step should be downloading the YouVersion Bible app, right? So you can do that right now. And here's why this is so important. If you go to the YouVersion Bible app and you pull up the home screen, at the bottom is a little search button. And when you hit that search button, you can say, okay, will God ever leave me? And immediately it'll pull up all kinds of scriptures about God's promises about being with us. And you can scroll through them, and all of a sudden, look what comes up. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. Keep your life free from the love of money. Don't be content with what you have. And because God says, hey, I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to forsake you. And all of a sudden, you've got the promise right here. But if you don't have access to it, you're not going to be able to complete the process. Man, I want to encourage you this week. I want you to make this your next step. In fact, this is one of our next steps on our connection card this weekend. Would you be willing this week to start building your own monastic handbook by just answering these 3 questions? By downloading this template. In fact, there's a template that we have connected to our app. It's connected to our website, and there's even a QR code that we're going to show you in just a moment, where you can actually put this on your phone. You can print this. You can begin to write in this. You can use this to put into your own journaling. But I'm telling you, this process is amazing. It's a tool that will absolutely begin to change some of the lies and identify the lies that you may be living out of, and how do I begin to change those so I can live out of God's reality and experience more contentment and more happiness and more peace. Now, back to the story. So we're calling 911. We're sitting at the top of the interchange. My daughter says, Dad, the moment you called 911, my eyes began to fill up with tears. Our hearts are racing. We're like, oh my gosh, is somebody out here trying to ransack our car? We're out where we have no way to protect ourselves. And so I get the dispatcher on the phone. I said, hey, we've got an emergency. We need a police officer. We're at this intersection. And she says, okay, exactly what intersection is that? And I tell her again. She says, I think I've got an officer very close to you right now. I'm like, oh my gosh, thank God. We need you to send them as soon as possible. She said, let me contact him and have him head your way. And about 2 seconds later, blue lights flashed right 30 feet in front of us. The car sitting in front of us was the police officer. And he drove over to our car, and he said, hey, apparently I kind of wigged you guys out. And we're like, oh my gosh, yes. And he's laughing, and we're laughing, a nervous laugh, by the way. And he said, yeah, I saw you here. This is where I catch speeders. I sit up here and I clock speeders both directions. And we were like, we are so glad to see you right here. And he asked if he could help us. And we told him we'd broken down. We'd called a tow truck. And he said, well, sometimes tow trucks take a long time to come, sometimes 5 or 6 hours, because there's not many services around here. Let me give you the name of our local tow truck. I said, well, they're working on it. I'll take the name, but we'll let them keep working on it. Well, he went after speeders, came back. Every time he'd come back and park in front of us, he'd turn his lights off, and he'd park back in front of us, and he'd flash them blue just to say, hey, it's me, I'm here. And then, we'd feel good about it. And he did this like 4 or 5 times, and then eventually he came over and said, hey, you guys still doing okay? You don't have a tow truck yet? It's been about 2 hours. It's now about 1:30 in the morning. And we said, yeah, we're still waiting. He said, call this other tow truck. So I'm now on the phone with the supervisor at the roadside assistance through our insurance, and I'm like, listen, we need a tow truck. We've been out for 2.5 hours. And he said, I'm going to stay on the phone until we get it here. I said, hey, I don't know if this is in your like bank of tow truck companies, but here's a local one. The guy checks it out, and he's like, yeah, they are. Let me give them a call. He calls them, and they commit to being out in 30 minutes. So we're sitting there for 30 more minutes. And he said, the problem, though, is that this guy's committed to take your car to wherever you want to tow it to, but he doesn't have any room to carry you or your family to a hotel. So you're going to have to figure out transportation. So Julie and I are like on the Lyft app and the Uber app trying to get an Uber to come to an intersection on a highway at 2 in the morning in one of the most dangerous parts of Georgia, and nobody's taken our request. And so we didn't have any options. We said, what are we going to do? And the police officer hadn't been around for a while, so we just decided to call 911 back and say, hey, again, we've got an emergency. We're going to be stuck out here. Is there any chance the officer could come and help us? She said, well, I'm going to have to contact him. Well, about that time, guess what? He pulls back in front of us, turns his lights out, flashes in blue, says, hey, I'm here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he just showed up right in front of us. Let me go talk to him. Walk over and talk to him. I said, hey, we're trying to get 15 miles back down the highway to Tifton. There's a Honda dealership. We want to go to this hotel. It's right next to the dealership, so we can get our car fixed tomorrow. I said, He said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, they're going to charge you an arm and a leg, and they're not going to be open tomorrow. I said, well, it says they're open. 8:30 tomorrow morning. I said, well, that's the sales department. The service department's not going to be open till Monday. And he said, and I can't help transport you down there because it's out of my county. He said, you do whatever you want to do, but here's what I would suggest. How about you go to our big hotel in town, this little town named Ashburn. It's the Quality Inn. You know what kind of town you're in when the Quality Inn's the biggest hotel. And so he says, why don't you, it's 2 miles from here, let us take you there, park your car in the parking lot. In our police garage, we've got a guy that works on our cars, on our snow plows, on our mowers, and he has a young kid that's his apprentice, and they have this mobile repair business. They'll come to your hotel and put an alternator on first thing tomorrow morning. I'm like, ugh, that sounds sketchy. Why? Are you sure that they're going to be able to do this? It's now about 2:30 in the morning. He says, hey, if they don't show up, I'll come put the alternator on myself. Here's my cell phone number. I'm like, all right. So the tow truck guy and him, they talk about how they're going to transport us. They agree the best way is for us to stay in the van while they put it up on the tow truck, and they take us, never ridden on a tow truck in a van before, and they take us to the hotel. They drop us off. Our car's there. We go to sleep at 3 in the morning, wake up at 7. I call the guy at 7:15. He doesn't answer my phone call. So I try to text him. I said, maybe he's a texting guy. So I text him my request. And all of a sudden, within 30 seconds, he says, hey, what kind of car do you have? I'd be happy to help. I'm like, oh my gosh. He shows up in a matter of 15 or 20 minutes. He looks at the part. He goes up the road to O'Reilly's, picks up the part, comes back. And would you not believe in 75 minutes, we are on our way back home about 10 o'clock in the morning. Crazy. And, did things work out the way we planned? Absolutely not. But as we navigated that moment, there were moments where, fear set in. There were moments where we questioned, okay, God, where are you? But I'm going to tell you, if we would allow those things to hijack us in those moments, there's so many things that wouldn't have happened. All right, we had to ask ourselves, okay, in the uncertainty of this moment right here, what's real? What's not real? Did God abandon us as we've been out here? No, not at all. Did God protect us? Absolutely. I mean, it was like amazing how much we saw his protection. Did God provide for us? Yes. I mean, in incredible ways. And then Julie and I were wrestling through the reality of like, oh my gosh, we're horrible parents. Good parents would have put their kids in a hotel instead of going back onto the interstate with a car that had a battery light on. But we were like, well, we just feel inclined that we should probably do this. But, one of the crazy things that happened is if we would have stayed back at that first filling station and never gone on down the highway and ended up at the top of an empty ramp in the middle of the night, we never would have run into that police officer who towed us to a hotel, who allowed us then to have access to his mobile repairman to fix our car, who, by the way, the repairman was 17 years old and fixed our car and sent us on the way the next morning. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Crazy. In fact, here were a few of our learnings as we thought about this and this situation, what we believed about ourselves and about God. We said, God was with us right here. God protected us. He provided for us. Things not going our way didn't necessarily mean we didn't done something wrong. Sometimes we believe that lie. If things don't go our way, maybe that's because I did something wrong. No. Oftentimes, God's ways are actually very unconventional. The cool thing about navigating this process of where are the places where I lean into lies, where are the places where I'm actually leaning into truth that God tells me, the cool thing is you don't have to do this alone. God actually says, hey, I'm going to fight for this with you. I just need you to participate in the process. We're gonna close and sing a song here in just a moment, and I want to just put a couple of the lyrics up here because these lyrics are really, really cool in light of what we're talking about. It says, when all I see is the battle, guess what? God sees the victory. When all I see is the mountain, you know what God sees? He actually sees the mountain moved. And as you and I, when we walk through the shadows, when we walk through the difficult moments, when we walk through the moments of uncertainty, and we have to say, okay, what's real, what's unreal in these moments? Guess what? God's not abandoned us. His love is actually surrounding us. He says there's nothing to fear because we're safe with him. Even when we have the illusion of not being safe, we're safe with him. And so again, here's the questions, here's the QR code. Man, I hope you'll take these with you this week. I hope this week you'll find a little solitude, a little time to just reflect on perhaps what's a thought or a feeling or sensation I've been feeling that's just kind of stressing me out, that's taking away my peace and my happiness. And then dig in, what's the lie perhaps that's behind that's attached to that? And then what does God say about this? How do I actually make a turn to begin to get to a new place? I want to encourage you to take these with you. Some of us are going to face things this week where you're going to need this process. All right, let's go ahead and stand. We're gonna sing a song, and I want to share a prayer over you before we sing this. And instead of me just praying a prayer, I want to share a prayer that I read every single morning over myself, over my family, over you as a community. It comes from a book called Common Prayer, a liturgy for ordinary radicals. And here's what it says: May the peace of our Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. And may he guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storm. Guess what? You're going to have some storms this week. But may he protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. Man, I hope you're amazed this week when you lean into the promises and don't just get caught up in the unrealities. And may he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. As we sing this song, man, I hope this song is a tool of encouragement for you this week. And as we go through this week and we try to fight these battles and uncover these unrealities and live out of the fullness of God in happiness, contentment, and peace.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Take a moment to follow our podcast on your preferred platform and be sure to download our app to stay informed on everything happening here at Crosspoint. And if you like what you heard today, don't hesitate to share it with a friend that might need to hear it too.